And this state is one of the most consequential and one of the most crucial, which is why you're here.
Huge.
Especially this part of the Valley. And just to reiterate what I said earlier, every single one of you going out with Turning Point Action and to chase ballots and to register voters, JD, we're seeing in this state, one of the buried leads is that this state is actually becoming more Republican, not more Democrat. In 2020, in 2020, we had about 100,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. 4 years later, we now have 260,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. So we have become, and that's net, that is a net increase.
Huge.
And it's happening because everyday Americans are seeing the failure of the open border policies, of seeing what's happening internationally, which I definitely want to talk about, which does not get enough attention recently. But also, Phoenix, especially, and everyone here is feeling it. It used to be a decade ago one of America's most affordable cities. Remember that? Remember you used to brag to all of your friends and family in Chicago, LA, and New York? Well, come to Phoenix, you can afford anything. We are getting crushed by inflation here. Inflation in the Sun Belt is the worst in the country, from housing prices to grocery prices. Why is this happening, JD? Explain it, and what will Vance do about it?
Yeah, so inflation's obviously complicated, but in some ways it's very simple. When you let in when you talk about housing, for example, you let in 25 million illegal aliens into this country. On the one hand, they're going to compete against Americans for scarce homes that are out there. And then Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote for the Inflation Explosion Act. So mortgage interest rates are higher, home prices are way higher, and now Americans can't afford to buy a home. That's exactly what's happened, right? You bring in too many people, you have them compete against Americans, and then you drive mortgage interest rates through the roof. That's exactly what Kamala Harris has done. Now, she's also, of course, gone to war against American energy. And energy goes into everything, right? You want to manufacture anything, you need energy. Our farmers want to transport food to the grocery store. They got to do it on trucks. The trucks require energy. So when you raise the cost of energy, then you raise the cost of everything else. Kamala Harris would rather us buy oil and gas from tin-pot dictators all over the world. I think we ought to buy energy from American workers and from American territory, and that'll create a... And Charlie, that'll create a lot of jobs, man, but it'll also drive down the cost of everything. I mean, we have to remember, 30 years ago, and I hear this from Democrats, I hear this from independents, I will hear people say, 30 years ago, our parents, just working a normal American middle-class job, could afford to buy a home. And they could afford to send their kids to a school where they were going to get an education and not an indoctrination. And even if you weren't rich, you could trust that your kids were going to walk down the street in safe neighborhoods. We have taken all of that away, except for the very rich and privileged people in this country, because they can afford private security, and they can afford to send their kids to school wherever they want to, and they can afford when Kamala Harris raises the price of energy by 50%. You know who can't afford it? The gross majority of American citizens. And we cannot forget that when these guys say that they stand for the common man or they stand for working people, you know who stood for working people and his policies backed it up? Donald J. Trump for 4 whole years.
And when Donald Trump was president, one of the least reported economic miracles was the blue-collar boom.
Amazing.
Where those that worked with their hands, the muscular class, and I see some of you guys out here, the plumbers, electricians, the welders, those of you that shower before work and after work, those of you that are talked down to by your leaders because you don't have a college degree. By the way, I'm right there with you. I didn't go to college either, by the way. You guys are building the country with your hands, and you're increasingly joining the Republican Party because our values are together. But the muscular class of this country saw their wages go up quicker than even high-income earners. That's what happened when Donald Trump was president. There was a miraculous blue-collar boom. And this is why, JD, everyday voters, they might say, oh, I don't know how I feel about Trump, but my life was better when Trump was president. My life, we were richer. Our communities were safer. We had a border. That alone should decide the election. Can you talk about how blue-collar America, the communities that you represent in Ohio, especially, because that is really the blue-collar center of this country, they were flourishing under Donald Trump?
Yes, they were. And I think it's useful to go back a little bit because we have to remember, and I hate to say it was bipartisan, Charlie. For 30 years in this country, you had Republicans and Democrats united around a very stupid principle that America didn't need to make its own stuff. So who makes 95% of our ibuprofen? The Chinese. Who makes the antibiotics that we put into the bodies of our children? The Chinese. Who makes even some of the weapons that our troops need to fight with? The Chinese. Donald Trump, for the first time in 30 years, said, this is idiotic. We need to make more in America with American workers and for American people. Now, that was a national security imperative, right? Building thousands of American factories, that happened under Donald Trump. Like you say, take-home pay, especially for blue-collar workers, skyrocketed under Donald Trump's administration. So it was a national security imperative, but it also meant that a lot of people were better off. And I just want something very simple, and I know Donald Trump wants something very simple. If you work hard and play by the rules, you ought to be able to afford a home and a nice life for your family. It's very simple. This is not like crazy, you got to save the world and fix every problem. We just want Americans to be able to live a decent life in the country their parents and grandparents built. It's not so much to ask. We just got to fire our broken leadership and get somebody who knows what they're doing back in the White House.
Amen. Let's emphasize one of those points. We have a serious housing shortage. You mentioned the illegal issue here of we're competing against foreigners for homes. By the way, what a violation of the social contract that your 25-year-old son, who's an American citizen, gets married, wants to have a beautiful family in Gilbert, and has to go compete against a foreigner for a home? We should not put up with that, okay?
No, we shouldn't.
Our homes should be prioritized for Americans first above foreigners, period. And so, can you speak to that, JD?
Absolutely. Look, Charlie, you put it so well. This is disgraceful. Kamala Harris's entire policy is to import millions and millions of people into this country who violate our laws and then give them benefits that should go to American citizens. We could go down the line. She wants to give them homes that ought by rights to go to American citizens. She wants to give them Medicare. She said this. She wants to give illegal aliens Medicare, which would bankrupt that program and throw millions of American citizens into poverty. She wants to give them Social Security after American citizens paid into it for 30, 40 years. Kamala Harris wants to give the American dream to people who shouldn't even be here. Donald J. Trump wants to protect the American dream for people who ought to be here, who deserve to be here, and who have fought for this country their whole lives.